Chicago police say a 36-year-old woman was shot several times in the chest. She was taken to Mount Sinai Hospital where she later died. A 27-year-old woman is now in police custody. Police say a weapon was also recovered.
I heard people arguing, so when I turned around, I seen two girls, and they were just about to get physical. And then the little girl, one girl was screaming, and another guy, and then the guy got in. Then I heard another lady's voice. Next thing you know, it's pa 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 pa.
She didn't wake up that Friday morning knowing it would be her last. She had no idea that a simple drive to the west side of Chicago would end with her bleeding out in the middle of the street, while strangers stood over her body screaming and crying. What makes this case different from every other Chicago shooting you've heard about, what nobody is actually talking about, is that the woman who pulled that trigger wasn't a criminal. She wasn't a gang member. She wasn't prohibited from owning a firearm. She was licensed, state-approved, legally carrying, and now Shaday Ingram is dead. Welcome back to CrimeLab Report. I'm your host, and today we're diving into a case that just happened 2 days ago in Humboldt Park, Chicago, a case that is already raising serious questions about road rage, gun laws, concealed carry, and what justice even looks like when the person who kills you did everything the law asked her to do before pulling that trigger. Stay with me, because this one is going to make you think. On Friday, June 26, 2026, at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon, Shaday Ingram was driving to the Humboldt Park neighborhood on Chicago's west side. This wasn't late at night. This wasn't a dark alley. This was broad daylight. Sun up, people out, traffic moving, in the middle of one of Chicago's most historically complex and deeply scarred neighborhoods. Shaday was on West Chicago Avenue near the intersection of Homan Avenue, a regular street, a regular Friday afternoon, and then everything stopped. Surveillance footage captured the moment the situation began to spiral. A dark green Subaru, which Shaday was in, came to a stop in traffic. Within seconds, a silver Cadillac pulled up hard alongside it. What happened next is what every witness at that scene cannot seem to shake. The driver of the Cadillac got out of her car. Shaday opened her door. Two women, face to face, in the middle of a Chicago street, in the middle of the day. And I want you to hold on to that image for a second, because nothing about what followed had to happen. According to Chicago police and multiple eyewitnesses on the scene, the two women got into a physical fight, a fist fight, out in the open, right there in traffic. But before that altercation could play out the way fist fights do, somebody reached for something other than their fists. The 27-year-old woman pulled out a gun and opened fire. Shaday Ingram was struck multiple times in the chest at close range. She collapsed. She was rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital on the west side, and she never came home. Eyewitness Dave Sardor was driving past when he heard the shots. He told reporters he didn't even register what was happening at first until he got close enough to see a woman not moving in the street. He called 911 and stood there watching the aftermath unfold. His words were simple but devastating. He said people were just screaming, crying, and hugging a dead body. Think about that. Hugging a dead body in the middle of a Chicago street on a Friday afternoon. Another witness, Jose Ramos, gave reporters the clearest picture of how this escalated. He said he heard two people arguing, turned around, saw two women about to get physical, and then he heard a man's voice in the mix too. And then the shots came. Pow, 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 and then silence where a living person used to be. Now here's where this case takes a turn that most people covering this story are glossing over entirely. When Chicago police took the 27-year-old shooter into custody at the scene and recovered her firearm, dispatch audio revealed something that changes the entire conversation around this case. This woman had a valid FOID card. That's a firearm owner's identification card, required by the state of Illinois to legally possess a gun. And on top of that, she had a concealed carry license. Let that sink in. The woman who shot Shaday Ingram 4 times in the chest in broad daylight, during what witnesses describe as a fistfight, was not a criminal carrying illegally. She was a state-sanctioned, background-checked, licensed gun carrier. So I need to ask you something right now, and I want you to think about this seriously. If someone has a legal right to carry a deadly weapon, does that right come with the authority to use it during a fistfight? Because that question is going to be at the center of everything that happens next in this case. And the answer to it could mean the difference between this woman walking free on a self-defense claim or spending the rest of her life behind bars for the murder of Shaday Ingram. Illinois law is very specific about when deadly force is justified. You cannot simply pull a gun because you're losing a fight. The law requires a genuine, reasonable belief that you are facing imminent death or serious bodily harm. A fist fight, two women going at it in traffic, does not automatically meet that standard. But here is what makes this legally complicated. We do not yet know who threw the first punch. We do not know who initiated the physical contact. We do not know if Shaday had a weapon of her own. And we do not know what was said between these two women in the seconds before that gun came out. What we do know is that the Cook County State's Attorney's Office has not filed charges yet. As of right now, a woman is dead, a suspect is in custody, a firearm has been recovered, there are multiple eyewitnesses, there is surveillance footage, and still no charges have been announced. And that silence from prosecutors is telling. Because when the law gets complicated, when self-defense enters the picture, when a license carrier is the one who pulled the trigger, prosecutors don't move fast. They move carefully. Because if they charge murder and a jury comes back with self-defense acquittal, this case becomes a precedent that echoes across Illinois for years. Now let's talk about where this happened, because the location matters deeply to understanding this story. Humboldt Park on Chicago's west side is not just a neighborhood. It is a community that has been through generations of pain. Since the 1970s, this area has carried the weight of gang activity, deep poverty, disinvestment, and the kind of systemic neglect that turns streets into survival zones. The Latin kings were founded here. The maniac Latin disciples have roots here. Decades of violence have left marks on this community that no amount of gentrification has fully erased. And while Chicago as a whole has been making historic progress, recording its lowest murder numbers in 60 years in 2025, the West Side continues to absorb a disproportionate share of the city's trauma. And that progress? It is now under serious threat. Violence prevention organizations operating right here in these West Side neighborhoods are sounding the alarm that federal budget cuts are pulling the funding that drove those historic drops in crime. One community leader put it plainly: don't defund success, but defund it they might, which means neighborhoods like Humboldt Park, already carrying so much, are being asked to do it with even less support beneath them. Shaday Ingram was killed in a neighborhood that has been fighting for its own survival for decades. That context doesn't explain what happened to her, but it surrounds it. Now, I want to go back to something eyewitness Jose Ramos said that I don't think is getting nearly enough attention. When he described what he saw before the shooting, he mentioned two women about to get physical. But he also mentioned a man. He heard a man's voice in the middle of this confrontation. Who was that man? Was he in one of the vehicles? Was he a passenger? Did he say something that escalated this from an argument into a physical fight? Did he play any role in what happened to Shaday? Because right now, every report you'll find on this case focuses on the two women. But there was at least one other person in this equation, and nobody is asking about him. And that brings me to the unanswered questions in this case. Because there are several, and every single one of them matters. Who initiated the physical altercation? Because in any self-defense claim, the identity of the aggressor is everything. If the 27-year-old got out of that Cadillac and walked up to Shaday and threw the first punch, her self-defense argument collapses. If Shaday came at her first, the picture gets more complicated. What started this road rage incident in the first place? Was it a cutoff? A horn? A gesture? Because the trigger, the original spark that put these two women out of their cars and into each other's faces, has not been publicly identified. And understanding what set this off might tell us everything about how premeditated or spontaneous this shooting actually was. Who was the man Jose Ramos heard? And where is he now? Was there any prior relationship between these two women? Because one of the things that gets lost in road rage cases is the assumption that two strangers simply snapped at each other. But what if they weren't strangers? What if there was history between them? Something that predates that Friday afternoon on Chicago Avenue in Holman. What if this wasn't random at all? We don't know. And right now, investigators aren't saying. What exactly does that surveillance footage show? Because we know it exists. We know it captured the Cadillac pulling up alongside the Subaru. We know it shows both women getting out of their vehicles. But what does it show in the moments right before the shooting? Does it show who made the first aggressive move? Does it show the gun being drawn before or after physical contact was made? That footage could be the single most important piece of evidence in this entire case, and it has not been released to the public. And perhaps the most painful question of all, who was Shaday Ingram? Because in the rush to cover the legal complexity of this case, in the debate about concealed carry and self-defense and prosecution strategy, Sh0t herself has become almost secondary to the story of how she died. She was somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, possibly somebody's mother. She was a woman with a life, with a routine, with people who loved her, who got into her car on a Friday afternoon in Chicago and never came back. And the people who were at that scene, hugging her body in the street before the ambulance even arrived, those people are carrying something now that no court case is ever going to fix. I've been researching this case since the moment it broke, and what strikes me most is how quickly something this devastating becomes a debate about policy rather than a reckoning about people. Yes, the concealed carry angle is important. Yes, the self-defense question is legally significant. Yes, what the Cook County State Attorney decides to charge this woman will set a tone for how Illinois handles armed confrontations that begin as fistfights. All of that matters. But Shaday Ingram was a real person, and she deserves for her name to be said clearly, for her story to be told completely, and for every question surrounding her death to be asked loudly and persistently until someone in power is forced to answer. Because here is what I keep coming back to as a researcher. We live in a country where the right to carry a firearm is protected and in many states actively encouraged. And with that right comes a version of power that changes every single human interaction it enters. Two women in a road rage dispute without guns ends in bruises, maybe an arrest, maybe a court date. The same dispute, same anger, same words, same fists, but add a legally carried firearm to the equation, and one of those women ends up on a medical examiner's table while the other sits in a police station waiting to find out what she's going to be charged with. That is a reality this case is forcing us to look at directly, not abstractly, not as a political talking point, but as a flesh and blood outcome on a Friday afternoon in Humboldt Park. And I want to know what you think about that, because this is the kind of case where people are going to land in very different places. Some of you watching right now believe that a woman who felt physically threatened had every right to protect herself with the weapon she was legally licensed to carry. Some of you believe that introducing a firearm into a fistfight is not self-defense. It is an escalation to lethal force that the law should not excuse. And some of you are somewhere in the middle, waiting like the rest of us to see what the evidence actually shows before making a judgment. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now, because this conversation needs to happen, and I want to hear where you stand. What I can tell you with certainty is this. We are going to keep watching this case. When charges are filed, we will be here. When that surveillance footage enters the public record, we will be here. When this goes to court, and it will go to court, we will be here breaking down every development, every legal argument, every piece of evidence that emerges. Because Shaday Ingram deserved that level of attention. Her family deserves answers. And this community, a community that has already buried too many people, that has already fought too long for the right to simply exist safely on its own streets, deserves to see justice handled with both speed and integrity. Shaday Ingram was killed on June 26, 2026. She was taken in broad daylight, in a neighborhood that knows laws far too well, by a weapon that the state of Illinois said was perfectly legal to carry. The woman who fired that weapon is in custody. The charges have not been filed. The questions are piling up. And the people who love Shaday are somewhere right now trying to make sense of a loss that makes no sense at all. If you've been watching this channel, you already know that we don't just cover these cases and move on. We stay. We follow up. We come back when the system tries to quietly close a file and hope nobody is paying attention. So if you are new here, subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell, because the follow-up on this case is coming. And if you've been here with us, you already know what time it is. Share this video, because the more eyes on this case, the more pressure on the people who owe Shaday Ingram and her family some answers. We'll see you on the next one.